Buongiorno, everyone. It is such a pleasure to welcome Marietta Cambareri today with us. I'm sure many of you have seen Marietta's beautiful exhibition at the Boston Art Museum. And if you didn't, then you will have a chance to get to know it, and we will hear some stories behind the scenes as well. Thinking about Luca della Robbia, I think there's really no other artist who you can find on every corner in Florence. Luca lives a very long life and leaves an incredible legacy behind him. So, Marietta, I can't wait to have this beautiful interview with you.
It's such a pleasure to be here with you, Pella. The show is a few years ago now, but I am always happy to revisit Luca and the Della Robbia. So it's a real pleasure for me.
Before we go into it, I just wanted to say I think we have a few interesting connections to Florence. We both have lived in the same 16th century palazzo.
Yeah.
Just around the corner from Bargello. So we were really in the heart of Florence, and we enjoyed the same view of Bargello towers. But would you tell us a little bit about yourself? I guess you have Italian origins with your beautiful name.
Well, yes, indeed. All of my grandparents were born in Italy. So I'm a second generation Italian American. I grew up in lower Manhattan in what was Little Italy. My family really never completely moved away from there. And it really was discovering, David, I have to say this, Donatello, and that sort of changed my life as an undergrad. And I remember coming to Florence and thinking, I'm going to learn how to speak Italian and come live in Italy, because I did not speak Italian at home. And I have to say, I did that. And so it's been a wonderful journey. And, I've been at the Museum of Fine Arts. I'm about to celebrate my 20th anniversary at the museum.
Wow.
But the Della Robbia show really is just the highlight of my professional career. So it's such a pleasure to talk about it with your group today, with all of some very nice friends and new friends. So.
And I think, when you put a show together, I think there is a lot of magic that has to work to come together, right? All the right people to say yes to make this happen. But I think maybe what we can start with is for those who are maybe new to art history, who maybe don't know Della Robbia well, maybe we can start with just learning a little bit about him. And I think when you study an artist as you did, you probably get also a sense what kind of person they were. So maybe if you can tell us a little bit of what your own impressions are of Luca della Robbia. How does he start? And so yeah, let's kind of begin. I will give you the microphone.
Okay, well, I'll take a second to share my screen and to get started. So there we go. So I've started us just on a general view into the gallery at the MFA, just to get started, and to just say that this show did, as you can see, happened in 2016, 2017, starting at the Museum of Fine Arts and then going on to the National Gallery in Washington, which was also quite a thrill for me. But really, for me, what the Della Robbia and what Luca is really about is Florence. And I know that we have many lovers of Florence here, because the Della Robbia technique, which was essentially invented by Luca, and we'll talk about that, is really and truly a Florentine art form. It only lasts for about a century, and it really is localized for the most part in the Della Robbia shop. So it's truly a window into the Florentine Renaissance. And as everyone can see, Florence has not changed very much from when this map was made in the 1490s, right? Looks very much the same. And our story really begins with the great Cathedral of Florence and the great Dome of Brunelleschi, which was completed in the 1430s, right? And where does Luca della Robbia really first appear? He appears working at the heart of what is really the center of Florentine creative ingenuity, right? Brunelleschi has finished this incredible dome, And then a lot of activity starts happening in the 1430s to decorate the interior of the cathedral. So this great engineering feat, which the famous writer Leon Battista Alberti, whose family had been in exile, comes back to Florence in the 1430s, and in 1435 he writes a book on painting, right? And so he dedicates it to Brunelleschi and the great genius of Brunelleschi, because he arrives and he sees the incredible dome. And then he praises 4 other artists, and they are Donatello, Ghiberti, Masaccio, and Luca della Robbia. And in the 1430s, Luca is not at the same level of fame, and people don't know Luca quite as well as these other great stars of the Florentine Renaissance. And so he really does appear working in the Cathedral of Florence, and working side by side with Donatello. And one of the earliest works that we have by Luca is his beautiful cantoria, or singing gallery. It's an organ loft, really. And I just show you a couple of details of I'm sure many of you are familiar with these wonderful singing and dancing children that are part of this wonderful work, which was paired with a work by Donatello. So one side of the cathedral crossing, you've got Luca, the other side, you've got Donatello. And so they're kind of immediately, Luca's quite young, he's immediately seen in comparison with Donatello. And so
Marietta, did you have any kind of, do you have an inkling of what was the relationship between the 2 artists? Vasari is not really giving us any idea of the rivalry between them, correct?
So, Donatello is about 15 or 16 years older than Luca. So I think you have to imagine a younger artist looking at an artist like Donatello, and really, I think the sense of competition probably came more from Luca's aiming for the greatness of Donatello. We don't have much more of a sense of how they interacted, but we know that they were working in the cathedral workshops together at this point. They're both carving marble, so they're very close, and Brunelleschi is there as well. So Luca's really thrust into this incredible world. And I think sometimes the cantorie, people tend towards the Donatello as this energetic, exciting. But when we look at Luca, there's a delicacy, a softness, an emotionalism that you just get into these faces and really feel their presence. So Luca's bringing something very specific to his art that's somewhat different from what we see in Donatello. And at the same time, and I just wanted to show you a little, you can see this is how they would have been set up. You can see this is Luca's cantoria. Above what we're going to be talking about are these lunettes, right, that are by Luca. And here's Donatello's. This is just a little photo montage of how they literally were facing off at this moment. But I did want to make the point that Luca della Robbia presents himself in the cathedral in 3 different media, because he's carving marble for the cantoria. He then presents the first major example of his great invention, and he is credited with this invention of this technique of glazed terracotta. But he also was working on the bronze doors below.
He's interesting.
So he's an artist who, although we think of him,
I think it's interesting how Renaissance artists.
So we think of him as.
Yes, sorry. We think of these Renaissance artists, they're multi-talented, right? Not as artists today who maybe are specializing in just one medium. Do you think this is why Alberti included him in the group of these other older artists who are already done important work?
Well, he certainly would not have known the glazed terracotta quite yet, because it's really an invention that happens around 1440, it seems. He would have known Luca more from, say, the cantoria and for the work that's going on in the cathedral. He would have seen him in this company. We don't know exactly when Luca began working on on what we consider his great invention of glazed terracotta, but maybe there were inklings already. And I just show you these first two lunettes that decorate the cathedral, 1442 to 5, and then 1446, right? So we're a whole decade later. And in the meantime, Luca really has developed this new invention. So I did want to say a word or two about that invention, because he's credited already in his own day with having invented something new, that this is a type of glazing for terracotta sculpture that is a kind of a new way of working. And I show you here a tabernacle that is now in the church of Santa Maria in the town of Peretola, so the town where the airport is. But it was actually made for a church at the very heart and center of Florence, and that is the church for the hospital of Santa Maria Nuova in the center of Florence, the Church of Sant'Egidio. And I think there are a couple of things that we have lost from the Renaissance that leave enormous gaps in our understanding of early Renaissance Florence. And this church is one of them, right? So, so as you can see here, this is actually all carved in marble, but this blue background and this frieze and this lower frieze are all done in this technique that we now know as glazed terracotta. So it is fired clay that is covered with glazes, and we'll talk about the glazes. And you have these beautiful, rich colors that have some very particular characteristics. So I hope you can tell that that's marble, and then behind it, there are these fields of glazed terracotta. But also look up in here where you have this kind of painting on flat terracotta. And notice right away, everybody often thinks of Luca as blue and white. He's already doing green and purple right from the very beginning. And so one of the interesting things is that he definitely learned this technique by talking to and working with potters who are making maiolica, tin glazed earthenware like this. And this is a drug jar that is in the MFA's collection. And I hope you can see that, do you see how there's a lot of areas where it's not quite opaque, where it's a little smushy? Well, this is the technique from which Luca jumps off. It's not a complete invention. It's a kind of perfecting of a technique. Because if you were making a jug like this, you would model your jug in clay and fire it. Then you'd put a white underlayer of glaze, and you see that white, fire it. And then you'd take it out and put these other colorful glazes, including this blue cobalt, and fire again. So there are two firings, right? But with the Della Robbia glazes, there's only a single firing for the glazes. And his true invention is that he's able to create these colors that are opaque and very brilliant. And I think you can see the differences, for example, when you see this frieze compared to the maiolica. That's really the invention. And we know that the reason for that opacity is that Luca added to his glaze mixture much more tin than was ever used in maiolica. And that gave opacity, and it gave an evenness of color. So it's a kind of technological leap from what he would have seen, and he would have known the potter who's responsible for these pots. They were made by a potter named Giunto di Tuggio, and we know that Luca and Giunto were connected. But I'm also showing. Do you see that? Do you see this little crutch? And do you see the crutch here? These drug jars were made for the same hospital that Luca was working for. So they're literally there at the same moment working together in the sense that they're providing works of art for this hospital. And we also are almost certain that Luca was learning this maiolica technique from Giunto di Tuggio.
That is a new name, I think. Giunto is a new name, I think, for all of us. And incredible that the hospital is still active. I mean, if you're a tourist in Florence, and God forbid something happens, you end up in Santa Maria Nuova.
So one of the things that I love about thinking about this period in Florence is that we can actually put people together this way. They're both providing works for the hospital. They're both in the neighborhoods together. The hospital's not very far from the cathedral, right? So that's the major technical difference that gives Della Robbia sculpture that its look. Beautiful opacity and color coverage. And he was praised by, for example, by Vasari for a notion of making color and terracotta almost eternal. So Vasari puts him into comparison, say, with ancient sculpture. It endures forever. But when we think about why, how did he come, what was behind this? I always like to show the Matisse Blue Nude, because there is this quality of how blue and white visually just pop, right? So you go into the dark cathedral and you see that that's probably what Luca was thinking about when he proposed maybe, or was commissioned for these two lunettes that really are the major debut of this technique in the cathedral. And I just show them to you side by side, but also one at a time. The earlier relief is of the Resurrection, and I think you can see it's pretty much all blue and white, and beautiful expressive qualities that we saw already in the Cantoria, right? And when this was finished, we actually have the document that talks about the second relief and suggests to Luca that maybe he should make the trees look like trees and the mountainsides look like mountainside. And so he starts to add more naturalistic color to the reliefs. And you remember, we saw he was already had those colors working on the tabernacle, right? So you have trees and mountainside that is green. So you have more than the blue and white.
Incredible. And I think the Opera del Duomo, they even ask him, right? In the contract, they tell him, use the real colors, right?
Exactly. They push him towards a naturalism that was not quite present in the earlier relief. And often, so that blue and white is the kind of the standard and still carries across space very, very powerfully, but he starts to take on this more naturalistic quality. So the other thing I just wanted to stress from the beginning of our conversation about Luca and the Della Robbia technique is how important clay, and this particular clay, was to Luca's work. So I'm showing you a 16th century treatise, but I love it because you see the potters are actually pulling clay from the riverbeds, right? So what's essential to the Della Robbia technique is that Luca uses Arno clay from the beautiful river, the Arno that flows through Florence. And we actually know that the Della Robbia owned property on the Arno and sort of down the Arno. This is just a shot that's very evocative, and it comes from somewhere near Figline, Val d'Arno. But you have to think that Della Robbia actually had kind of direct access to this beautiful river clay, and it has a particular quality, and it has a lot of calcium in it. It's a light-bodied clay, and it's the same clay, for example, that Giunta di Tuggia was using for his maiolica. It's perfect for taking glazes, and that's the other secret: the glaze recipe and the clay and how they come together. So it's really really Florentine, because it's made from the earth of the Florentine of the Florentine countryside, right? It comes from the river, and then Luca does incredible work refining the clay. So he's come up with a recipe that perfectly merges this glazing that has a lot more tin for opacity, a variety of other elements for color, and the clay, which just works perfectly together.
Marietta,
so that's the heart and soul of his invention.
how wonderful that he's connected to the Arno River. It makes me also think of Brunelleschi when he would have to do really big designs for the dome. He would actually go by the Arno and do that right close to the river. So such a Florentine heartbeat added to it.
Absolutely. And then one thing I'll say about the workshop is that once they figured this recipe out, they never revealed it to anyone. And even today, we can study it through scientific analysis. We can't write down the recipe because once you've fired
Wow.
these things, the materials change, they transform. So we can guess what's in there from percentages and things, but I can't tell you the Della Robbia recipe even today.
Wow. Incredible. It's like the beautiful colors of Venetian glass, right? It was the secret you die with.
Yeah. And it's, you know, it's so, and it does have more in common with Venetian glass than you would think, because early on, these figures were actually described as figures of glass. Florentines knew that it was different. It looked different, you know, and I'll just move ahead to, it looks different, right? It doesn't look like marble. It doesn't look like maiolica, and it shines, it's brilliant. And one of the descriptions is that they were figures of glass. And of course, the glazing includes some of the, you know, includes the materials that you would be using to make glass.
Yes. Yes.
So I wanted to move on now to kind of focus deep into one object that really was at the heart and soul of our exhibition in Boston, because there's so many amazing stories kind of attached to this piece. And I show you an installation view of the Visitation by Luca della Robbia. So the same decade that Luca's making those lunettes, he seems also to have been making this incredible two-figured sculptural group of the Visitation. And he made it for a church not in Florence, but in Pistoia. And it's as if he's presented the reliefs in the cathedral. He's working on angels for the cathedral as well in this glazed terracotta. And then he does this incredible two-figured sculptural tableau in the 1440s. It's like he's conquering certain types of sculpture and inventing certain types of sculpture as well. And there's a document of, I think, 1445, which seems to describe this in the church in Pistoia. So it's all happening in this same decade, from that beginning invention with the tabernacle to the reliefs to this splendid object. And so I just show it to you in the installation shot.
Am I wrong to assume that it was actually commissioned by a woman, a widow, right? Who was dedicated to this kind of
it's
a
really
group
interesting.
of visitations?
Because the document itself says that, this early document says that Bice, who was married to Jacopo Fioravanti, so a major family of Pistoia and Florence, commissioned candles for the piece. And so it's immediately associated with a woman. We don't know who commissioned this.
Okay.
That has sometimes been extrapolated that she actually commissioned it. We know that she immediately revered it. It's not impossible that the Fioravanti family was responsible for commissioning it. But what we do know, and I think that even since the show, it's become more clear to me that it certainly decorated the altar of a female confraternity.
Yeah.
Because there is a female confraternity dedicated to Saint Elizabeth, so the elderly woman in the group, in the church of San Giovanni Forcivitas in Pistoia. So female devotion and female, it's amazing. It's a very early date for a female confraternity to be noted. So it's very deeply embedded in female devotion, but we don't know who commissioned it.
Interesting, Marietta. And I think when you secured this loan for the exhibition, I'm sure everything came together. Was that hard? Was it a challenge to be able to ship something of this size to the US?
Yes, I'm just going to go back for a sec to the main view of the group. As I was getting ready for this talk, Paula, I knew that we were going to talk about this, and I've told the story so many times of what it took to actually get this group here, and I will tell it again. But what I couldn't remember was how I got to the crazy point of actually thinking I could ask for this group to begin with, because it is such an important work of sculpture. And it is so important to the Church of San Giovanni. And I came around because I did figure out why I thought I really wanted this group for this show. I will tell you that this is why I can't remember why I was even asking for it, because it completely transformed the show once it came. I just show you the Church of San Giovanni for Civitas in Pistoia, a small, beautiful, small Romanesque church. And you can see that the visitation, anybody that's been to Pistoia and been to San Giovanni will remember it here. I just want to go back to the group again itself. And how it came about that it came to the show, I used to say, well, if the show opens and this is there, it's like a miracle has happened. But it didn't exactly take a miracle. It actually took a group of incredible people. And the most beautiful thing about working on this show is that people supported the idea. And I remember going to the Bargello, because the Bargello was a major lender to this show, and sitting with the director at the time, Ilaria Cesari, and talking to her about the show and why I wanted this piece. I know it's crazy. And what Ilaria did is that she picked up the telephone and called the Soprintendente in charge of Pistoia, and Maria Cristina Mazdea. So Ilaria Cesari at the Bargello, Maria Cristina Mazdea at the Soprintendente, Laura Speranza at the Opificio, one of the great conservators of working in Florence, and Lucia Cecchi, who was working for the Archdiocese, the Archbishop's office in Pistoia. Those are the four angels of this show. These women somehow listened to this idea and helped me to make it happen. So it really is about having an idea and having someone believe in it. So if you ever have the opportunity to pick up the phone and support something, do it, because you never know what could happen. And what happened is that the visitation did come to Boston. So this is the view of it, and it actually looks, you can actually practically see it, but I know that when I used to go to visit it in Pistoia, you could hardly see it in its niche. And I show you the moment when on a very cold wintry day, I was there present as they started to deinstall it from the niche. The reason, and here you see that same day we arrived at the Opificio to look at the pieces, and this tells you why it could actually travel, because this incredible group is actually made in pieces and comes apart, which means the individual pieces could actually be packed safely, because that was the first thing that Ilaria said and Maria Cristina said, well, we have to talk to the conservators to see if it's at all possible that it would be safe enough to transport this. And so, and I just show you a view of the back of the top of the Virgin in this group. And you see it's super, super dirty, right? But that's all. It's just very dirty. And that's the other beauty of Della Robbia glazing, is that it preserves really the only thing you could do to really harm a Della Robbia sculpture, God forbid, is drop it. Because this is just dirt on the surface. And we were able then to bring it to this incredible, brilliant light by very careful cleaning of the surface. There was mold on it. It was very dirty, but it was all there. There was a little bit of damage down in this area that had to be repaired. So, and that's another story I really want to stress, is how exciting and wonderful it was to do a lot of conservation for this show. One of my favorite installation shots is this image of the visitation in its 4 pieces. And this in itself tells us a lot about the Della Robbia technique. Because remember, it's made in Florence. It's made in the workshops of the Della Robbia, right? And then it's sent out to different places. So this was not made in Pistoia. This was made in Florence and transported to Pistoia. So for a couple of reasons, it would be made in these kinds of pieces, because it needs to fit into a kiln and fire, and it could actually be transported. And the Della Robbia were brilliant at doing exactly that. So I always like to point to the lower portions of this incredible group. And when you see it like this, it's extraordinarily beautiful drapery, but basically they're like very big flower pots. They're very sturdy and stable. They could be packed safely. And that was the deciding factor as to how and why they could travel.
Marietta, does the big body of Mary, the bottom part of Mary, does that give us a kind of a chance of how big would be the piece that they would be able to fire in the kiln? Because just imagine the kilns and how big they would have to be to actually to do this and to keep the temperature stable for at least 24 hours, correct?
We don't know what kiln Luca was using for this, but we do have a sense of how big Renaissance kilns get, and I don't think that these are especially these are not super big, but they are not being fired together. And what you can see, I think, you'll have to believe me maybe, because what you do see is that Luca's working very hard to get very even walls. But they each had to go into the kiln separately, which means they had to fire with a similar rate of shrinkage and not break. And so it's really an incredible technical achievement. And I just want to show you how it comes together. So you see that this is one of the most beautiful and telling details, and that is that the hands of Mary, for example, are fired together with the upper body of Elizabeth. And so you also have to imagine, and this is the moment of actually pushing the group together so that they interlock. Incredibly enough, there's no pins. There are no pins that hold it together. There's no adhesive that holds it together. It just comes together like a puzzle.
Wow. Wow.
So Luca had to have this incredible facility, and that's actually a word that Vasari uses for him. He has this incredible facility for clay, that he could judge how these images would interlock, and the way the gazes of these two figures come together is really a testament to his incredible artistry and technique. I always think that, he's not as well appreciated as he should be. I mean, you have these images of the young Mary and the old Elizabeth, and then you think forward sort of to Leonardo with these kinds of contrasts. Or I look at this beautiful face of Mary, incredibly beautiful. And you see how the head turns, the gaze travels in another direction to meet the gaze of Elizabeth. It's really incredible. But I can't help but think that, like, Michelangelo might have known this kind of incredible view, a beautiful, beautiful young virgin, when he was thinking about the Roman Pietà, for example. I think Luca has a lot of power that maybe he's not always given credit for.
And Marietta, what I'm thinking? It will be almost impossible to create something like this in marble. I mean, this kind of relationship between these two women, I mean, their embrace, right? If you think about marble, how would an artist execute this in one single marble block, and then this kind of a little bridge between them?
Because this is one of the most beautiful passages, Paola. This kind of streaming drapery. It's so elegant. It's so beautiful. But that would be the center of a block of marble, right? And it would be empty, So it would. So indeed, it's really incredible. And I do want to say this. A lot of people often say, well, Luca decided to move into this kind of material because it's like marble. It's a cheap version of marble. It was much easier to work in clay, but I always, I push back on that, because does this really look like marble? The brilliant shine, it's totally different. The white, pure white of this is very different from marble. Marble has particular colors, right? This has a particular color, and it's white, and it's really hard to achieve this white and to achieve this shine. So I don't think this is a cheap version of marble. It's not. It's less expensive. Yes. Florentines love that, right? But it's not a cheap version of marble.
No, and I think that tactile quality, right? I mean, look at the hands of Mary. You can see them kind of touching that beautiful robe of Elizabeth. I mean, something like we will see from Bernini, but centuries later.
Yes, absolutely. So, and I just thought I'd take you a little bit on the voyage that once it came to Florence, came from Florence to Boston, the group then went to Washington for the exhibition there. And this is one of the things about exhibitions is that like objects take on a certain life within the exhibition and different from their own lives. But I just before moving to that, I just want to stress again how beautifully this was conserved at the Opificio delle Pietre Dure by Laura Speranza and her team. And they did things like put an interlayer so that the pieces could come together without any kind of damage to the object as they were coming together. And so part of what Pistoia understood was that this kind of conservation attention could actually mean a lot to the object. And so it then went to Washington, to the National Gallery in Washington, and I show it to you in that installation. But when it went home to Pistoia, it was actually shown in a church, not its usual home. It's the Church of San Leone, and I think you saw it there, Paola, right?
Yeah.
What a sight! Yep.
What a sight it was!
And they based their design on our installation in Boston. They came and they measured everything, and they recreated that. It turned out that this year Pistoia was the center of the city of European culture. So this return of the visitation became part of that celebration of the town of Pistoia, and so it was a thrill to see it in this setting. Yeah. But it was even more of a thrill to go back about a year later and discover that they had actually moved the visitation from its niche to the right side of the church, which is, we are almost certain that this was, I have to say, not the first place it was shown in the church, but it was moved. We think it was on the inside of the facade, but it was moved to this location very early after it was made, because you can see, what does that do? It means here's the back of Mary, and it in relation to the way that a person would walk towards the high altar, say, of the church, that's where you would want to see it, right? You'd want to, there's such empathy in this object that you'd want to be able to be like Elizabeth and approach the Virgin. So this is how I last saw it the last time I was in Pistoia, and took this photo of it, and to truly be able to see the object. And that whole process, got started when Ilaria picked up the phone and said, no, she understands, she's not crazy, just talk to her, she understands what she's asking. I mean, at first people were saying, oh, you're gonna have to get the Pope to agree to send it.
I'm sure you had some kind of blessing, maybe not from the Pope, but some special blessing definitely came in. But Marietta, to think about that, if there was no exhibition and that you didn't have the idea and courage to ask, probably this beautiful group would still be in the other niche, covered with mold and all that dust. I mean, the exhibition really gave it a new life. And I think, in San Leone, where I saw it, it was incredible. And there was a big didascalia, a big explanation where they say it was in Boston. So that pride definitely came through that paragraph in which they speak, and it was restored thanks to the exhibition. So, really, the exhibition in the US gave it a whole new life. And a whole new, thing to see in Pistoia. I mean, it was incredible to see it in a new setting. Was something very new, even for people who are locals.
I just worry. I hope they're dusting it.
Marietta, if not, next time you come in, just bring your materials with you and.
But this is much closer to what its original function in the church would have been. So that's heartening too. I did want to say a quick word about this sculpture, because of a couple of months ago now, I think you interviewed the Contessa Simonetta
Brandolini.
Brandolini Dada, who from Friends of Florence. And I just wanted to acknowledge that they helped us with the conservation of this object. So that's the other thing about exhibitions that I don't know if people realize, that you might think you can do an exhibition, but you have to actually patchwork together funding and help for many different things. And Friends of Florence helped us to conserve this sculpture, which is attributed to Luca della Robbia. Very surprising, I think, because it is quite colorful. And it comes from it's now in the oratory of San Tommaso d'Aquino in Via della Pergola in Florence. And it too probably dates to the same decade of the 1540s, maybe 1440s, 1450, when Luca's, I like to think of him as really kind of conquering all of these challenges. And for me, it really told the story of what I think my favorite Luca that's in the streets of Florence is the wonderful Madonna and Child that is that decorates Or San Michele. So the next time you're in Florence, if you're not there right, and if you're not lucky enough to be there right now, you have one of the most beautiful Lucas to look at without having to go into the museums that are sadly closed right now. It is this roundel, and if you're walking from the Duomo, from Piazza della Signoria to the Duomo, you can greet, and she can greet you, and the baby can greet you as you walk down Via del Proconsolo to get on this main drag of Florence, and you know. I'm taking this photo from below, right? So you really do, she really does see you. And I think you know, what does she need? She just needs to be cleaned off. She just needs a little bit of a shower to get rid of all of this, the dirt, because the colors are there. And so being able to bring the San Tommaso Madonna to this show really talked a lot about color for Luca. Which people were a little skeptical about her, but to me, when you see these two, this area of these two figures, this smooth brow, I really see a very close comparison, and we were able to make this comparison in the show, right? So it made me feel really good about the San Tommaso Madonna, and I did just want to give a special shout out to Friends of Florence for helping us with this conservation, and I'm wonderful.
They really do so much. Marietta, if you could go back just for a second to Or San Michele, I think it's incredible to just compare the incredible condition of the Luca della Robbia Tondo compared to the really worn out Pietra Serena, I guess, all the way around it. I mean, it is really surviving the test of centuries.
Exactly what Vasari said. He's making terracotta sculpture almost eternal. And it's just, this is my pet project. I really want them to clean this. I really want to be on scaffolding and be up there and see it. I think I said a little earlier that what's so wonderful is that those of us who know Florence know this center of Florence quite well, and how small it is, and how you run into people that you know all the time. Well, I just wanted to say a couple of things about Luca and his family in Florence itself. In the 1440s, so for example, when he was still making the Visitation, Luca was still living in the home of his father in Via Sant'Egidio, right here. He was baptized in the church of San Pier Maggiore, and he was baptized in the baptistry, but his local church was San Pier Maggiore, a church that is now lost to us. And like the hospital church of Sant'Egidio, this is another of the biggest losses that we have, I think, for understanding Renaissance Florence, this great convent church of San Pier Maggiore. And Luca was buried there. So we've lost his grave site, actually. So here's the street he lived on. Here's San Pier Maggiore. Here's the hospital that we've just been talking about. So Santa Maria Nuova. Here's the Duomo where he's working, right? So in 1446, he and his brother buy a house in Via Guelfa, and more or less Via Guelfa and Via Nazionale, near the station. So they've moved out of this tight little area slightly out of the center of town, and that's because they were setting up their own workshop and their own kiln. And so you want to be slightly out of the center of town if you're going to set up a kiln, right? So we can sort of really get a sense of where Luca was, and once he's in Via Guelfa, that's the workshop that sees the next generations of his family until the shop folds, basically. And that happens more or less by about 1550 at the latest. So the technique actually kind of disappears. It's not popular anymore. It's so much what we think about as Renaissance Florence, but by 1550, it doesn't have a long life. So it's very much a Renaissance moment. So I just like to think about how Luca was operating in the town of Florence, right? And I just love, this is a friend who's one of the great conservators at the Metropolitan Museum, and she's on Via Guelfa and saw this little shop where they actually make, that's a potter with glazes. And Wendy knocked on the door and says, do you by any chance know where Luca's shop was? Of course, we don't know exactly where it was, but it was a sort of wonderful moment. And here is one of the kilns, so I wanted to show you, this is again, 1550, this is what one of these big Renaissance kilns might have looked like. So you can see the fire and I don't think Luca's kiln was this big, but this is as big as they got in the period. And this was mostly for making pots. So just because Luca starts the shop, invents the technique, and then he doesn't have children. We have his nephew, Andrea Della Robbia, who takes over the shop. He works with his uncle for many years. He takes over the shop. He has 11 children, and 5 of them are actually known to be sculptors. And so that's the list you see, Marco, and the most famous being Giovanni Della Robbia. And then there are these outliers, the Buglioni, and that's the other shop that actually was making glazed terracotta. And the story that Vasari tells is that Benedetto Buglioni got the secrets from a woman of the Della Robbia shop, of the Della Robbia house. So for many years, I'm picturing like this servant girl having a fling with Benedetto Buglioni. And since I've been working on women in the Renaissance, I thought, what are you kidding? She was making the glazes. This is a woman in the shop that's actually making the glazes, in my opinion, because how could she give him the secret of the glaze recipe if she didn't know it, right? So that shop operates a little longer than the Della Robbia shop, but that basically is the end of the Della Robbia. But I wanted to just show you that one of the other most beautiful loan came to us from the Bargello, and that is the beautiful little boy by Andrea Della Robbia, that sweet softness of that Andrea is known for, and that these beautiful, one of the things that people always say, you can always tell an Andrea because he does these beautiful hazel gilded eyes, but look at the delicacy with which he's painted the eyebrows, for example. It might remind you of Luca's little babies. And of course, the most classic Della Robbias are Andrea's Innocenti from the Ospedale, which were also conserved by the brilliant Laura Speranza at the Opificio. But to go back to the show, I wanted to talk a little bit about Giovanni Della Robbia and this spectacular object, which it was another incredible loan to the show. You can see the scale of it, right? And this comes from the Brooklyn Museum, and it was one of the early Della Robbias in America. And when I started working on the show, it was in storage. It was actually not in storage. It was behind a wall in the galleries, basically. And then it had come out of the wall and was packed in an offsite storage facility in a great big crate, all in one piece. And so the idea of getting this to the show is another one of these incredible conservation challenges. And Brooklyn was able to participate in the show because let me tell you a little bit about this incredible lunette of the Resurrection. It was commissioned by the Antinori family, and anyone who knows the Antinori family in Florence might recognize their coats of arms. And here is Mr. Antinori, the donor, who is, yes, bigger than Christ in this scene of the Resurrection. And this beautiful resurrection with this incredible sleeping soldiers. Wildly beautifully colored relief, one of the great garlands in the Della Robbia workshop. They're very famous, of course. People sometimes know the garlands before they know the Della Robbia. And remember back to Luca and his resurrection. And this is Giovanni Della Robbia, so one of Andrea's sons. And he's really taken the technique pretty much as far as it can go as a kind of a hybrid of painting and sculpture, right? So it was actually commissioned by the Antinori family, and another one of these moments of what it takes to get something like this conserved. The Antinori family themselves helped us conserve this object, and so so we were able to bring this to Boston, and just to give you a detail of, this is my very favorite detail of, this is sort of painted sculpture merging into painting of the tree, the cypress trees blowing in the breeze with the birds flying. And this is, I think, as far as the technique can really travel towards this merging of painting and sculpture. It kind of hits a peak here, where you're painting on the stone, on the flat tiles, but you've also got these incredible areas of very, very high relief. And I always like to compare that to Donatello and his image of, you know, atmospheric perspective, that moment of, you know, nature moving through the trees, or Leonardo again. The Della Robbia are not always put into this category of thinking in terms of how they might fit in with artists like Donatello and Leonardo. A great story from the conservation. What you discover, this is made in pieces. I think it's very clear that these are individual pieces that then come together into this big relief. So one of the things that the conservators in Brooklyn found, you see the squirrel?
Wow.
Well, on the inside of one of the tiles right nearby, there's actually a little sketch in the clay of a little squirrel. It's him or her. And I hope that you all can see that. So these are these wonderful moments that you can't ever imagine happening. And I just would, if people are interested in the conservation of these kinds of objects, the Brooklyn Museum, go to their YouTube channel, because there's a really lovely film of the incredible work it took to conserve and send this object to Boston, because they took it all apart and put it back together, sent it in a crate in one piece. And then this is our team in Boston getting ready to lift the relief into place. And I always like to point out my colleagues that are up at the top waiting for it. It's going to get lifted. It was nauseating for a curator to watch this, actually, but it was incredible. And that was the finished product.
Wow. Oh, incredible. One more jewel. How many pieces in this lunette?
There were about 40.
Wow.
Total. It was not a huge show, but it was about, oh, how many pieces, how many are in this piece?
Yeah.
I used to know that number off the top of my head, something like 88 pieces.
Wow.
To come together into this one. And again, remember why? Because this was in a villa out in the countryside, and it was made in the shop and sent to the villa in pieces and put together in situ. In its location. And in fact, here is the location. Sorry, it was made for this Antinori villa, Villa Le Rose. And we do think that it might have gone over this doorway. We're not completely sure. But this is the Antinori villa that seems to have first owned that the relief was made for. And I just show you how it looked in Washington, where they did put it over a door. It was quite spectacular. One of the doors going into the show. But it also went back to Italy. It went back to the Bargello. The Antinori very much wanted to then bring it home. And so it was shown at the Bargello in 2017 after the show closed. So this object too traveled thanks to this exhibition. And here it is in its installation at the Bargello. And now it's back on view in Brooklyn. So how are we doing for time, Paula? Should we open up the?
No, I think if you want to show, I know you have more images. Please go ahead. I'm sure everyone will appreciate. We can go a little bit over. I think no one will mind if you have time,
Yeah,
Marietta.
no, it's fine. I don't want to overburden our guests.
No, no, please. I think everyone wants more. I think we didn't have enough yet. Okay.
I won't be offended if you leave. So I just another word about, and I think I've talked a lot about the conservation issues and what it takes to conserve objects like this for exhibitions. The Brooklyn relief was, hadn't been on view. It was in storage. The first time I saw this relief, which came to us from the Met, was on a cart in a dark storage area, and it looked like this. And it was one of the objects that I very, very much wanted to bring to the show. It's Andrea Della Robbia's very large roundel of Prudence. And this is another one of these stories where, as you do the conservation, you discover things. So if you're looking carefully, people will notice that something has changed from the left to the right, and not just the fact, we've already established that this is just dirty and there's some chips and cracks, but you can go from this kind of dirty to this kind of clean just with good cleaning on a Della Robbia. But I think you can also see that another one of these great garlands has changed a bit. And that's because, and you're gonna have to trust me on this, but when the conservators took the piece apart, they found along the inner rim, like in here, numbers that actually served as a key for putting the relief back together, right? So here, whatever moment of putting these pieces back together as it came to the Met, they were sort of grouped like with like, but it seems like Andrea meant for these pieces to be not quite so neat. And so the Met put it back together in the order that was indicated by these little secret numbers that were on the piece. So remember, again, they make it in the shop in Florence, and then they send it wherever it needs to go, and it needs to go back together. And if it's a really important commission, Andrea or somebody from the shop might go, but otherwise people might need help to put this together. So that was a huge difference. I think I'm going to put in a little plug for our book, because the cover of our book is actually the relief before conservation, because another thing about museums is that you have to get a book ready a year in advance, and they hadn't done the conservation yet in time for me to have the cover. So it's a kind of fun thing that this is how it looks now. And then just the last thing I wanted to show are these amazing large-scale sculptures, which were actually made by we believe were made by the artist Santi Buglioni. So you remember, this is the other workshop, and these were probably made around we think they're somewhere around 1550, and they really are the goodbye to the Della Robbia technique. This is the end of the line for this material. They're very large scale. They're slightly oversized. This comes from LACMA. This was in the deposits of the Uffizi. It doesn't belong to the Uffizi, but lives there. And this is in a private collection. And they're all made in two pieces. These are very big objects, but they are basically the last gasp of this technique. And after about 1550, 1560, no one's making sculpture in glazed terracotta anymore. But I also just wanted to share something about how you put together a show. People think about curators and how we have all these like exciting thoughts and how you're going to put your show together. And I had always thought that we would have this stage. I saw it as a stage. These are preaching saints, and so they are appearing to their public. But because this is thought to be Saint Francis, and these are Franciscan saints, that he would be at the center and he'd be high up, on a higher pedestal, and we'd have this nice, neat kind of pyramidal installation. And then I went to a Bruce Springsteen concert where I really saw that Bruce is just there lined up with his band, not pulled apart too much. And so I rethought the installation so that, and I used to call these our rock stars, and they were rock stars in the period. These are the preaching saints that, kind of bring the crowd in. So that's how sometimes you get ideas for how you're going to install a show, right? You go to concerts. And then just the back view of the great San Giovanni Capistrano from LACMA to give you a sense of the scale and basically a kind of goodbye to this technique. And really, it's not until the 19th century that interest revives for it. And this beautiful, I just want to share this beautiful quote from Walter Pater of 1888, where he talks about how Della Robbia really spoke to the 19th century. And there's this kind of revival. It's like these pieces of pale earthenware, like fragments of the milky sky, falling into the cool streets and breaking into darkened churches. And this is a kind of moment of revival that continues today. I mean, you start to look, I would encourage the audience in general, wherever you are, look for Della Robbia, because you'll probably see something like this, which is around the corner from where I live here in Brookline, Massachusetts. It's a copy of a relief at the Bargello, which went on to a school in about 1920. And then here's another version of that same relief that is over the door of the museum of the Oberlin Art Museum, the Oberlin College Art Museum. In New York, this beautiful evocation of Andrea in the auditorium of the Church of St. Mark's in the Bowery. And here it is in the early part of the 20th century, where it actually inspired a kind of Isadora Duncan dance of the Della Robbia. And so you start to see, you walk out of the Bargello, you can find Ceramiche Luca Della Robbia, copies after. And my favorite store for terracotta in Florence is in that same neighborhood. This is Via Sant'Egidio. So this is the street that that Luca lived on. And you can still, I hope, because I haven't been in Florence in a while, that these small artisans are still able to sell and make their things. I brought this comes from Spigoli, you know, like everybody else. I bought one of these wonderful little Innocenti. So if you're in Florence and you can support a store like Spigoli, please do. And I just would conclude with what this technique means to artists today. So here you see the artist Roberto Lugo at the Baltimore Art Museum, at the Walters Art Museum in Baltimore, looking at one of the other great Della Robbias in America, the spectacular Giovanni Delrovia, Adam and Eve. And he takes direct inspiration from that relief. And so an artist like Lugo presents, he's not working in the technique, but he's evoking the technique. And so the Della Robbia continue to inspire artists today. So that's what I've got for you. And I'm happy to take any questions, or everybody can rush off and do whatever it is that they're wanting to do.
Marietta, thank you. This was such a beautiful insight into work of Della Robbia and his family. I mean, he really was able to create a legacy and really keep his family going, correct, which what he invented. His nephews live from it. I was just thinking how not everyone in Florence was able to afford a fresco cycle or maybe a work of art by Donatello or some great famous artists, but everyone was able to have their Madonna and Child in their home, produced in Robbia's workshop, or let's say mass produced. And I think Bargello has such an incredible collection of Della Robbia. Absolutely. So it is definitely worth a visit. And as you said, it's everywhere, in every corner in Florence. Della Robbia really left his mark in the city. We do have a lot of questions that came in. Marietta, do you mind if I read some of them? Okay. Yeah. A lot of them are coming in as you were speaking. So one of the questions is, Marianne is asking, are some of these artworks still in that hospital? And this is Santa Maria Nuova.
There is something there. There's the church still. The hospital church is still there, and there are still some things there. I'm picturing myself walking in, and we were looking for whatever might still be there. It's definitely worth a trip there. Yeah. I'm not remembering if there's specifically any Della Robbias, but there are some remains of the space of the interior of the hospital, because it's still there and still functioning.
And a little tip here, the director of the hospital, they were actually thinking to close the hospital completely and to move everything to the Careggi, which is a big, really big hospital complex. But the director then decided to get some funding from, I think, the Regione of Tuscany, but also of the European Union. And they were able to not only keep the hospital going, but they also opened a small museum. So there are few pieces there. And I think, one little tip, what I usually do when it's really hot and busy in Florence, I actually go to the hospital's cafe. I mean, you just see all these doctors, in their little scrubs, but it's really cute because the cafe is right in the cloister and you see those crutches all around in the roundels. So it's one of the insider tips next time you find yourself in Florence.
Fantastic.
Go to the, cafe of the hospital. And then let's see, there are other comments here. Let me just make this a little bit bigger. Susie is asking, did Della Robbia have a special technique to get the brilliant whites? And you explained this. Eileen is saying, I've heard gelato makers in Florence keep their recipes a secret as well.
Yeah. Well, it's your bread and butter, right? I mean, you've worked hard to discover this this incredible technique, and really, I mean, it's what he gave to his nephew, and his nephew passed on to his children, was this very, very particular recipe. And it really took until the 19th century to come up with something like the Della. You can hopefully, usually, we hope as museum curators that you can usually tell the difference between a 19th century Della Robbia and an original Della Robbia, but it took until the 19th century kind of to figure it out again.
Yeah.
So
yes. Let me see if I can keep going down.
And I just will say, I want to stress about the white. I'm glad whoever that was that asked about the white, because it really and truly is a color. You think of white as neutral, but it involved a very, very high level of lead and tin. And it's the tin that gives the opacity, but also the whiteness. So, and it's very consistent across the Della Robbia shop once they've got that white. And just so, like, white needed tin, blue needed cobalt, green needed copper. So these iron oxides are what give the colors. And white is not an easy color to achieve. So I really want to stress that Della Robbia white is a real accomplishment.
And would it be just horrible to say it looks almost like the Bontalenti color of gelato? Gelato Bontalenti? If you're talking about gelatos, there's even a color that looks like it.
Are you hungry?
Yeah, I'm missing my Italian gelato. Gwen is saying, is there a counting of how many Della Robbias exist today around the world?
Well, what I talked to you today about were a lot of the really special one-off Della Robbias. These were really major commissions, extremely important sculptures. I didn't go into the other part of the production, and that was the reproduction. They were so because they're made of clay, they're made with molds. There was actually a reproduction already inherent in so you could get a lot of Madonnas, for example, from a single mold. They were never, I don't like to stress that reproductive nature of the Della Robbia, because even when you're doing something like that, you always have the chance to rework the clay, rework the glaze. So each one is very individual, but as we all know, there are a ton of Della Robbias out there. So they did produce a lot of material, and, thousands, I would, yeah, there are a lot. And then there are a lot of the 19th century things that come later. So there's some confusion until you get to really know the material between the modern production and the Renaissance production. But yes, they did produce it in multiples as well, especially Madonna and child reliefs.
You know what comes to mind, Marietta, is that beautiful Madonna and Child from Ospedale degli Innocenti, probably one of the first works of art they actually had in Ospedale.
Right.
The beautiful inscription about the kids who were who were living there. So it is site specific, and it is still in their museum. Neville is asking, are Luca's works mostly found in Florence, or did he receive commissions from other Italian cities?
That's a good question.
Luca's works Mostly, I have to say, you know, we have a document for a work that went to Urbino. That's and sadly that was badly damaged in the war. The Pistoia Visitation. It's really Andrea who ups the production in the shop, and he really, I mean, we know of Della Robbia's, and it's not necessarily Luca, but Andrea who carries on the production and is the real entrepreneur. All over Tuscany, you'll find Andrea and Giovanni. You'll find it as far away as Portugal and England. And much of that is done under Andrea. Luca stays a little close, his works stay a little closer to home. So some of them do escape to museum collections around the world, but the great Lucas are, you know, like the Or San Michele relief that we saw, the reliefs at the Duomo, the angels at the Duomo. So it's the Madonna and Childs that could travel, those small devotional objects. So those are the kinds of objects of Luca that you will find farther afield. But I think he was working mostly for Florentines, whereas Andrea and Giovanni were real. And one of the other sons of Giovanni actually goes to serve the French king and goes and works in Paris. And the great story there is, of course, that the material is just not as good there because why? What did we start with? The clay. Giovanni had, I mean, Girolamo della Robbia had the recipe for the glazes, absolutely. He did not have the beautiful Arno clay. And so the production in France is just not as fine.
Gwen is asking, how many museums and collections did you source pieces from for the MFA exhibition?
Yeah, it was something like 30. I mean, a lot of pieces came single pieces. It actually, that's what when I was thinking about the visitation. The show actually started out as a show about Della Robbia sculpture in American collections. And so I tried to pull things from a lot of different collections in America. So most of the material that came to the show was American. And then when the visitation came, it changed the nature of the show. And I think I had 6 loans from Italy. The Bargello was extremely generous with 3 loans, the visitation and the San, and the 5 loans, and the San, 6 loans because of the St. Francis and the San Tommaso Madonna. But I was really trying to understand the way America appreciated the Della Robbia, because they really are scattered across many museums in this country. And we were collecting it as early as the 1860s in America, I think.
Mila is asking, is there any other known freestanding tin glazed terracotta sculpture by Luca or Della Robbia family other than Visitation?
There are, for example, there's a pair of kneeling candle-bearing angels that are made more or less at the same time as the Visitation in the cathedral, smaller. Andrea does do, if you go to the Bargello now, there's well, you can't go to the Bargello now, I'm afraid, but the next time you go to the Bargello, there is an Annunciation by, an Annunciation by Andrea, 2 large-scale sculptures. There are those amazing Buglioni saints that I showed. So there are other full scale, but nothing is like the Visitation. That incredible tableau of those figures together. It's really, he doesn't do it again. So Luca doesn't do another that we know of.
And Buglioni studio will never achieve the same precision, correct? They will never really have what Della Robbia does, even if they steal the glazing and the colors. I think
it's never quite as fine, but
exactly.
if you do go to Pistoia and you walk around the town, there's a spectacular, I mean, Santi Buglioni is a great sculptor, no question. And he does this frieze for the front of the Hospital del Ceppo, which is a spectacular, wonderful relief, seven scenes from the 7 acts of mercy. If you look very closely at Buglioni glazing, it's never quite as refined, but Santi Buglioni is taking lots of risks. Even Benedetto, they tend to have taken things a little bit more along the naturalistic lines as well. So sometimes you see these kinds of, like, they're really trying to paint in the glazes. So they're not as refined, but they're sometimes really, really exciting.
Marianne is asking, are the irises hollow or painted a darker color?
So again, it's all painted in glaze. So it's all, you've got your terracotta sculpture, and even those little details of, say, eyebrows or the irises, which are sometimes encircled with a darker glaze, it's all painted in glaze in that first moment of glazing. So any of that kind of painting in glaze, it all happens in the glaze. The only color they were not able to achieve, and potters, if there are potters among you, you know this, that it's very hard to achieve red glaze. And so sometimes they apply red paint where you might want red glaze. So in the period, they were not able to achieve red glazes. So we do find cold paint on top of the glazes sometimes when you need red. And then there was gilding applied sometimes also after the glazing.
Yeah.
But all of that detail of painting is all done in the glaze for the glaze firing. And so one of the things people always, I didn't bring this slide, but it's a kind of, this is like our kind of nerdy curator conservator thing. We have like something that looks like all the tiles that are on our screen right now of individual eyes from all the sculptures that we looked at. So that,
Wow.
you know, you know, so we play this game. Oh, who's this? Oh, that's Luca from this. You know, so they're very particular and very individual. So
Yes, and Marietta, talking about the applying of the gilding. Well, I know in Santa Croce in the sacristy, the 12 apostles that are all around this beautiful Brunelleschi room, they actually had these rays of sun behind them, and if you go really close up, you actually see them. But of course, the gilding has been lost over time. So they would have been a lot more.
A little bit more gilding does survive than you might have, like so much of Renaissance sculpture. We know so much of it was gilding. So sometimes if you've got something in a conservation studio, you can see traces of the gilding. It also tends to get refreshed by later, not so nice gilding, but often you can find your way to the original gilding.
Fausto is asking, are there any known descendants of the artist living today? Wouldn't that be fun?
There is a Della Robbia family in the country, but I'm not completely sure that they are actual descendants of the of our Della Robbia. But there were a lot of Della Robbias. There might still be, but the workshop certainly didn't survive.
Marianne is saying, I love the shadows cast by the figures. This is in Visitation.
Mm-hmm.
And then Diane is saying, I think it was a miracle after all. And I think, Diane, you raised your hand. Do you have a question?
I'll let you read the question. I added
okay, so you did put it in. Okay, I'm getting to them. There's so many. Are you doing okay with time, Marietta?
Yeah. I could talk about Della Robbia. I mean, really, I can. Yeah.
So Barbara is saying, if I had been the Pistoia official giving final travel approval, I would have been a nervous wreck until it returned from the multi-stop voyage unharmed. I'm sure, Barbara, that's part of the game. You have to. Gwen is saying, can you comment on the family that copied the Della Robbias?
I think she talked about that.
Yes, we got that go into this.
Yeah.
And Neville is saying, how was the church lost where Luca was buried? And by the way, Marietta, I love it. This is our neighborhood.
Yeah.
Maggiore.
When did San Pierino come down? I'm not remembering it's in this late 17th, early 18th century. I'm not gonna say because I can't say specifically.
There's still an archway though.
There's still parts of it.
Yeah. And I think it was the National Gallery in London that did an amazing reconstruction of what would have been there. Right, Marietta, I think if you go on their National Gallery in London website, I think they have a really lovely documentary dedicated to the church and what would have been there.
On one of my trips recently, I went around because you can still see fragments of the church poking out of buildings in that neighborhood. It's really incredible. And they were going to visit people's homes and saying, can we peek in your bathroom? Because we think that there's a little bit of a molding from, and I think there's been a lot of work on reconstructing San Pierino. And so you can get a sense of it. But yes, of course, the arch is still there. There's still part of it is still still there. And the other great thing is that so many people have been working on the documents for San Pier Maggiore, over time, and we know so much more about the church itself. Not many new discoveries about Luca himself there, but that was his neighborhood for sure.
Nabil is saying it's amazing to see the way in which the object is displayed reveals different aspects.
Yeah. I did want to go back to one of the questions because I want to make clear how serious, we understood how serious it was to move that object. It was not taken lightly at all. And it really was only after the conservators made it really clear that it could be safely packed. And I mean, they did, it was amazing. Again, I don't know where, I believe this is published somewhere, but they did a 3D reconstruction of the sculpture in order to create the crate in which it would then travel. So everything was done to be sure that it was handled safely. And believe me, I felt the same way. I was like, every time it moved somewhere, and when it went home, knowing that it was okay, we do not take that for it lightly or for granted at all. It was really just that it actually is so sturdy. It actually could travel. So none of those objects moved easily. So, and they are all very fragile. So
the other comment here, there was an exhibition in Montevarchi back in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
David Wilkins is saying spectacular presentation. I'm so proud.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Marietta, don't we just always stay students, right, of our dear professors? I think we never graduate.
No,
it's always this moment of, my professor is here. Thank you so much. I want to thank fascinating talk. Just a lot of thanks. I will send you the chat, Marietta, okay, so you can see it.
Yeah.
Let's see. Let me just see if I can get, oh yes, David Wilkins is saying, at Sant'Egidio, there is that funny coronation of the Virgin by someone,
right,
but not Masaccio.
Dello Delli, that's right. That's why I went there. Now you remember, that's why I went there, David, because it's, thank you. It's a terracotta that was outside in the lunette on the exterior, painted terracotta, not glazed, or not painted and not glazed. And so yes, in fact, it's inside. There's wonderful conservation work on that as well.
And a really good point, David says. And of course, that's where Hugo van der Goes' great triptych adorned the altar now in the Uffizi Gallery. Exactly.
Mm-hmm. The Domenico Veneziano frescoes were there. So it's a huge loss.
Okay, and another question that came in, can Marietta shed any light on who may have been responsible for the fascinating rustici, St. John the Baptist at the MFA? It's not as white and obviously a variant glaze recipe, but who could have done that?
Yeah, well, that is another one of my children that is actually how I got started working on the Della Robbia, was from that. I actually have a picture of him, if I should put him up for you.
Sure.
See? So that's the sculpture that someone's asking about, and this is in our collection, and it was something that was literal. Another, Della Robbia got overlooked a lot. This glazed terracotta sculpture. It was up in our attic, and this was really how I started working on the Della Robbia, because it was up in the attic. It was filthy. It was broken, and my dear colleague Abby Heiken, who was sort of the co-curator and conservator on the show, we did everything you could possibly do to a terracotta sculpture, cleaning it, x-raying it, conserving it. And I put it out there as related to, it was already acknowledged that it was related to the great sculptor Giovan Francesco Rustici, related to a group on the baptistry, now in the Cathedral Museum. And shortly after it was sort of resurrected, thanks to my colleague Abby, 3 monographs and 1 exhibition, 2 exhibitions took place about Rustici. And everyone that worked on those shows, not us, felt that it was actually by Rustici. We know that, and so now he's attributed to Rustici. Whoever it is, it's a fantastic terracotta sculpture, about 1510-ish. And I always say, I don't care if it's by Rustici or not, because it's a fantastic sculpture, but consensus has gathered around it. The glazing is not the brilliant white, and my idea was that he was actually trying to get this softer color, and our research scientist was able to establish that there is a little bit more copper in this glaze than there typically is for Della Robbia. So I think that they were experimenting with the glazing and came up with this sort of creamier color. I think it could have been Giovanni Della Robbia doing that, working on the glazing because although other artists didn't have the technique, they often worked in glazed terracotta, but they worked with these other workshops. So Rustici is known to have gone to Giovanni Della Robbia to glaze a relief that's in the Bargello, for example, so that they recognized the skill of the technique of the Della Robbia technique, and I think they were experimenting with that Rustici, if it's by Rustici.
What would be the year for that?
Sorry?
What was the year for, do you know?
It's not dated, but I think it's somewhere around 1510, 1505 to 1515, something like that, around the time that that Rustici was working on the, I have had people try to attribute it to Leonardo. I have got to tell you that. People have done that, but I don't believe that, so.
I was thinking about Donatello's Mary Magdalene, of course, in wood, just because. Diane Archibald is saying, in the Casentino, they claim the Della Robbia family came from the Casentino Valley. Given the number of works in the Casentino churches, convents, monasteries, Laverna, was there a major workshop there?
The workshop was in Florence. The workshop, they made the stuff in Florence and they sent it to the Casentino. That seems to be, I mean, as far as we know, the workshop was really located in Florence. I mean, if anybody has been to the spectacular monastery of Laverna, all of that was made in Florence and taken up the amazing hill. And because we do have a document of Andrea going to Laverna to help with the installation of some of these spectacular altarpieces at Laverna. So our understanding is made in Florence.
Antonia is asking, is there a known relationship between Beautiful Visitation and Ghirlandaio's Visitation, which is now in the Louvre, which is very similar? Did the painting influence the sculpture or vice versa?
If chronology would suggest that the sculpture influenced the painting, so I agree. That is one of the most beautiful relatives, I think, of Luca's Visitation. So,
Marietta, as we go, the messages just keep going. I'm gonna just maybe scan very quickly and say, so Antonia is saying, finally, I'm fascinated by the late multicolored piece by Giovanni. You showed us how it pushed the limit of the painterly treatment of glazed terracotta, but the extraordinary mobility and activity of the figure of Christ against the mandorla backdrop pushes the limit of the sculptural.
absolutely, I completely agree. I completely agree. I think it takes the technique as far as it's going to go.
David Wilkins, yes, Luca is traditionally underestimated. He's expressive, he's subtle, he's delicate, he is tender. Let's see. Okay. Many, just thanks. I think at this point there are still many thanks coming in.
That's great. Well, thank you for indulging me. I love this material, and
it's fantastic. Thank you.
So, thank you. That's been great.
Thank you. It was really wonderful. Maybe there's one last question. We can take one more before we say goodbye. No, I think you have answered it all. Okay, anyway, yes, I think there people are also saying goodbye. Yes, grazie mille.
Thank you so much. It was
Thank
wonderful.
you. Thanks so much. Bye.
Beautiful, just wonderful.
Thank you.
Marietta, thank
Yeah.
you. It was such
Thank
a
you so
pleasure.
much. Marietta.
Thank you, Paula. Thanks for giving me the chance to talk to this nice group.
Thank you for sharing your love of Della Robbia with us. And I can only say I will meet you at the cafe in Santa Maria Nuova. How about that?
Absolutely. That's a great idea. As soon as
Or
possible.
after COVID, when they let you back in a hospital.
Yeah, so when
soon as
things are
possible.
back to normal and you know,
Yeah.
we can-
Right now, you don't go near a hospital unless you
yeah.
have to.
Yeah.
Marietta, there are a number of us who will be in Boston this fall from the Focus on European Art. There are about a dozen of us on this recording today.
Oh,
So
fantastic.
certainly
What's bringing you to Boston?
we'll let you know when we're going to be there, probably mid-September. We're coming to see the
Mid-September, hopefully we will be open and we are open right now, actually. The museum is open.
So
So
we will contact you. We're coming
Yeah.
to see the station exhibit at the Gardner.
oh, of course, of course.
We will
Fantastic.
look forward to meeting you in person and seeing you in Boston this fall.
That's great. It'd be so nice to
Thank you.
be meeting around art again, around real art and not screens. So it'd be great.
Marietta,
Thank you so much. It was
Thank you
wonderful.
so much. It
Absolutely
was
wonderful.
really wonderful.
It was fabulous.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you.
Marietta, thank you for spending this Saturday with us. And I really look forward to seeing you in Florence and meeting you in Cibre or wherever we can, we will go.
Yep, absolutely, Paula. It's very nice to have this chance to be together. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Ciao. Arrivederci, everyone. Thank you for tuning in.
Ciao.